Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and today we're asking the question, why do we think about physical and mental health differently? And with me in the studio today, we've got Ethan Worth. How's it going, Ethan?
Hi, yeah, it's good, George. Been practicing my yoga, learning all about mindfulness this week. So
excellent, that's good. Yeah, I've been on Headspace quite a bit as well in preparation, and feeling pretty good actually. Yeah, but I think we'll touch on the yoga point later. But that seems like quite a good cross between mental and physical well-being there. So we'll touch that. So who have we got in the studio this week?
So today we're joined by Geoff McDonald. Geoff is a global mental health advocate, campaigner, and consultant. He was previously the Global Vice President of Human Resources for Unilever. Hi, Geoff.
Yeah, hi, Ethan.
Hi.
Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. And we're also joined by Steve Larke. Steve is a consulting partner at Deloitte. He is one of our mental health champions and is passionate about supporting good mental health in the workplace and beyond. Hi, Steve.
Hi there. Very good to be here.
And it could be quite a bit of a serious-y topic today, but I think we've got our normal icebreaker challenge, haven't we?
Yeah, so every week we kick off with an icebreaker question, which none of us have seen yet. So today's question is, if you could swap places with anyone in the world for a day, who would it be?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
That is a hard one.
Yeah.
Do you know? I'll give you my answer.
Mm-hmm.
A homeless person.
Okay.
Oh, that's gonna be hard to top that one, isn't it? Why did you say that, Geoff?
Because I think it's important that we kind of get a sense of what it's like to live in a world that is not as privileged as ours, and what are the battles and the aspirations and the issues that homeless people go through. You know, I often see homeless people asking me for money every single day, and somebody once said to me, they said, "You know what? You shouldn't give any money. Instead, what you should do is ask that homeless person how they can help you. So help you with directions to a meeting that you're going to, or answer a question that you're struggling with, which gives them a sense of purpose and feel needed rather than a kind of a victim."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think I'd probably go for something a bit more crass, and I'm quite fascinated by Donald Trump's Twitter notifications, and imagine an hour just having hundreds and hundreds of bleeps on your phone probably isn't very good for your mental health, really. But maybe
so you want to be Donald Trump for the day?
Well, yeah, to give it a go.
Right, okay.
Probably not very healthy on the diet front, is it? So,
well, I'm going to go even more down the crass route after that very sensible suggestion from Geoff. So I would actually go with Jurgen Klopp. So I'm a big Liverpool fan.
There you go.
And I'd like to be Jurgen for the day. Just think it'd be great being leading Liverpool. I very much admire his people management skills. And also my wife fancies him, which should be helpful as well.
Who doesn't? He's
exactly. He's a legend, isn't he?
How about Ethan?
So I was also thinking more the crass route. I was thinking of being some kind of rock star, but then I wasn't sure if I could subject a whole arena of people to that experience just for my own enjoyment. So I think I would also go more down your route around the Prime Minister. So I think I'd be the Prime Minister for the day and kind of see what it's actually like, how much they can get on top of, and how much they can, the information that you have to be able to take in that short space of time, definitely.
Rise to the challenge.
Yeah.
Well, let's get stuck into this week's question, which, as a reminder, is why do we think about physical and mental health differently? And I think we're talking about how this sort of question and how, when we think about physical health, we think about the sort of men's fitness, men's health covers, and going to the gym, six packs, green smoothies, this sort of image comes to mind. And then, but when you think about mental health, it's kind of the image which comes to mind is the head and hands, and very kind of isolated kind of individual there. So I think for this question this week, it would be great to hear Geoff and Steve's views and experiences about mental health today. So I don't know who wants to kick off first. Perhaps Geoff, would you like to?
My experience with mental ill health or my experience with mental health?
Both, I suppose. Yeah, we're talking about both. I guess.
Well, yeah, because I've experienced both.
Yeah.
I've experienced both. So, as Steve knows, I mean, back in 2008, I got very, very ill with anxiety-fueled depression. Only one thing saved my life during the time that I was very ill, and that was my ability to talk about my mental ill health. And in talking about it, it meant that I experienced an overwhelming outpouring of love and support. And in many ways, it was only that sense of feeling loved by so many people that kept me alive during some very, very dark moments. And then in 2012, I lost a very good friend who died by suicide. And here was a guy who just couldn't talk about his mental ill health, and instead he took his own life. And, that was the catalyst for me to sort of begin to think about how do we at least have a conversation around mental health? How do we have a conversation around mental ill health? And as you say, George, how do we accept that, yes, of course, there are people out there that might be suffering and are not well, but also, we've all got mental health. And how do we begin to create a more positive narrative around mental health, something that's inspiring? When I walk into a Nike store, I see chiseled whippets all over the walls, and I kind of feel inspired to get myself a pair of running shoes. But when it comes to mental health, I see the images that you talk about. And so what's inspirational and aspirational? So how do we begin to really shift that narrative where we all kind of recognize we've got mental health, but sometimes, we're not so well, and we need to look after ourselves and get better.
And from your experience, it was talking about the ill health, which sort of meant you were able to then think about, actually, how can we look at this in a more positive way?
Yes, absolutely.
And Steve, is that a similar experience for you?
Yeah, I think when Geoff was talking about mental health versus mental ill health, I think it is helpful to think in that way, because it is a continuum, just as it is with physical ill health. So I think if I look back to times in my life when I was probably mentally healthier than at other times, but I probably wasn't aware or educated around mental health. So times when I would slip into being less well, I probably wasn't really aware of what that meant or what was causing it. And I guess if I look back to when I'd recognise as probably having first come up against depression and anxiety for the first time, which was about 5 years ago, then it was really a combination of events and circumstances coming together, which got to the point where my sort of head felt full and I just couldn't cope with it anymore. And that was a mixture of some bereavements, stressful situations at work, and other things that had all kind of happened at the same time. But I think I had delay in getting help for that, really, I think for two reasons. One, the stigma associated with it, that it was just something I knew nothing about. I hadn't seen any role models or people who'd been down that journey where I thought actually it ended up okay for them, so it's okay for me. I thought of it as being a massive thing to kind of put my hand up and say I had a problem. And then I think the second thing was denial. So I guess in my mind I associated mental ill health with circumstances, and I would look at it and think, well, actually my life's actually pretty good. I'm happily married, got a lovely family, my career's going well. How can I possibly be depressed? Sort of pull yourself together, man, kind of thing. And I think it was as it got worse and worse, I realised that I couldn't, and I was in a sort of darker place. And then really it was talking to someone. It was then going to see my GP that helped me to start on that journey. And actually, the reason I know Geoff, or the way I know Geoff, is that in the fairly early stages of that, a mutual friend had connected me with Geoff, and it was through that I started getting involved in the Minds at Work network that Geoff runs, because for the first time I met other people who had actually been on that journey and were kind of ahead of me on that journey, and it just felt like this. Actually, it's okay, and then learning that it is a spectrum, and it's going to be probably something that's always with you to some extent, but actually you can do things to manage it and to hopefully stay on the well side more often than not.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think it's a bit like, if you're in physical pain and it was very serious, you have a sore leg or broken leg or something, you can't just walk it off, and you have to see someone about it. But actually, in the same way, that denial point, you can't just sort of ignore these things.
And you notice the symptoms in the early stages, and and I guess for me now in hindsight, it was sleep was a massive one for me. So I was, for months, I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning every morning. But I didn't think anything of it other than that's really annoying because I'm tired. But, subsequently found out there's a huge correlation between that and depression. And, there are things that you can do about it. And I think there's just been, it's getting better now, but such a lack of education, I think, around those things.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting, that point you made around denial and stigma, because you often think of stigma as other people judging you or society judging you, but quite often the most damaging thing, or an equally damaging thing, can be you judging yourself and the kind of self-stigma that is attached. I guess on that point around stigma, what do you think can be done to kind of change the narrative, both from a self-stigma point of view and wider society? I mean, I think you've touched on it slightly already, but you could expand on that at all.
Yeah, look, I think on the self-stigma piece, I think the point that Steve makes, part of what I try to do is encourage more and more people to just tell their stories, because we've all got a story, and we've all been on the kind of edge, or if we haven't got a story ourselves, we've got a friend, we've got a daughter, we've got a brother, we've got a sister. We've all got a story, and I think the more we tell those stories, I often say every story that we tell is like sending a lifeboat out into the ocean. And all those people that are struggling and suffering in silence, do you know what they do? They cling onto the lifeboat, and they realize that they might just be normal and not alone. And so I think that can help with the whole self-stigma piece, is to just kind of realize, you know what, there are other people out there this is happening to. It happens to us all. And so therefore, it's, as Steve said, it's kind of okay. I think in terms of stigma, in organizations and workplaces, for me, that is all around education, investing in resources to teach us, what is depression? What is anxiety? What is stress? What are the symptoms to look out for? What are some of the resources that are out there that I can draw on to help get better or to prevent myself from getting ill in the first place? So I think there's a whole piece that needs to be done around education and training and across the whole organization, not just a couple of mental health first aiders here and there, but everybody experiencing and raising their levels of understanding and awareness, which I then think helps to deal with the stigma piece. And then I think the third thing is very much George's point around, creating that more positive narrative, having campaigns and, raising awareness, but in a more positive way around mental health.
And the timing of all of your experiences is quite interesting, because back in 2013 or 2012, presumably a lot of the information which is here now wasn't available. So how did you come across that? Was that first visit to the GP a bit of a new moment for that GP?
Yeah, I think there was far less awareness about it. Obviously, you knew that if you were feeling terrible most of the time for no particular reason, then there was sort of something wrong with you. But I think, particularly in the professional business context, there was hardly anything about it. In fact, I remember kind of in one of my darkest days trying to sort of Google, business people, depression, all these different kind of combinations to find stories. And actually, in fact, the only story I managed to find was actually John Binns, who some may know is, a retired Deloitte partner who still does a fantastic job for us in that area. And then that really struck me, that the power of people telling those stories. And as I say, then I met Geoff and others. And I know, Geoff, I think you were sort of given that or provided that challenge to the business community, and in discussions you had with politicians as well around, it's great that the royal family and that celebrities and people are speaking up, but actually it's not happening in the business community. And I think that has changed, so I think things like the Inside Out leaderboard that Rob Stevens has put together of giving more profile to people who are prepared to talk about it, just gives more and more people permission to also talk about it.
I guess, yeah, the idea is that it should be exponential, everyone grabbing onto these lifeboats, then sharing their story as well. So maybe that's probably why there has been a bit of a blossoming of this discussion over the last few years, perhaps certainly in business circles.
Yeah, George, I also think, the conversation has really shifted. I go back to 2008, then 2012 when I lost my friend, then, beginning this journey. And I think, back in those days, the conversation was it was really still a hard conversation around why should we even talk about this in a workplace? So it was more about the why. Whereas I think today, the conversation is more around what can we do? What should we do? And this is a very complex issue. And, I think senior leaders in all sorts of organizations are really now grappling with the question around, what could we be doing? Yes, to break stigma and to make sure that people, have got the right kind of support. But more importantly, what could we be doing as an organization where we actually begin to see mental health, physical health, emotional health as a strategic imperative that will enhance and drive the performance of our organization? And if it was to be a strategic imperative and a priority, what would we do? When I was in Unilever and we spoke about, one of the ways in which we would improve the performance of Unilever was to drive growth in Africa. Well, then we'd go and invest huge resources and we'd kind of know what to do to drive growth in Africa. To make health a strategic imperative and what do we actually do? I think that's the big question now.
Mm. I think as well, the you mentioned earlier, Geoff, the point around prevention. I mean, prevention may not always be possible, but certainly working on not just being something that's reactive to when people become unwell. And I think one of the things that's really been challenging me is thinking, as leaders, how can we create environments that are mentally healthier as well? Because if you think about, I guess, some of the things that professional services organizations do, the performance culture, a number of the, I guess, kind of year-end routines and things like that. So as a mental health champion, I guess I get into conversations with a lot of people who've been affected by that feeling of inadequacy. I know we sort of talk about imposter syndrome, but also this whole idea of insecure overachievers, which I know there've also been some podcasts about. I think it's understanding things like that actually in a high performing organization, there's far more people than you realize who are massively insecure. I mean, I can certainly relate to some of that myself. So then you're your own fiercest critic, but also you're constantly listening out for things that reinforce that view of, maybe I'm not good enough. So thinking, how can we create environments that are kinder, that are more supportive, that try and I guess cut some of that stuff off at the early stage. I remember listening to a partner from a city law firm who was talking about the fact that he'd seen this junior member of staff on a Monday who seemed kind of really down and fed up, and he said, "Well, what's the matter?" And she said, "Well, I had to miss my grandmother's 80th birthday at the weekend." Well, why was that? Well, because that request you gave me Friday, I've been working all weekend on it, and he had just made some kind of throwaway, "If you could get me this by Monday," and not realizing the consequences for this person. And at first he was slightly annoyed, that we should have said no. And then he realized, well, actually he had been implicit in creating a culture where people didn't think they could challenge it. So I think that's so important for us to create a place where people can go, actually really want to support you. Can't do it right now. When can I do it? And just creating that openness, I think is really important.
So do you find as a mental health champion that people come to you asking how they can better manage their mental health? Or do you find people come to you only at the point when they are struggling?
I would say still at this stage, it probably is mostly people who are struggling. So I think people will get to that position and then they will go and look and see what help could I get. And they'll read the stories of the mental health champions and will then sort of get in touch. And I think it is helpful to them that there are stories of people who've sort of been through it. But I guess I think what you're alluding to is right. It would be great if people were having those conversations earlier. I think what then does happen is you then have a relationship with that person. So you're then hopefully helping them on that journey as they then move to being healthier more often, and in terms of sharing some of your advice of things that kind of work as well.
And also just trying to, how do you get those conversations? How could you get those conversations kind of going in an organization that Steve is talking about? And I've got some wacky ideas out there, but if we were to go back to what I was saying earlier and we began to see this concept of health and well-being as a strategic priority. And, Steve was talking earlier, he was saying the guy who wants to be as Jurgen Klopp. Now, I'm an Arsenal supporter,
Never mind.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know it's anyway. I'm an Arsenal. Anyway, we won yesterday, which is quite cool.
1-0. That's
I know,
a surprise.
only one.
I'm a Newcastle fan as well.
But you know, I say to people, I said, where has this Liverpool club come from? I mean, here they are winning the Champions League.
It's a rich history, Geoff.
They almost won the Premier League. And the only thing that happened over the last 2 years is this guy Klopp arrived. And you know what he brought is he brought energy and passion. And you just look at the performance of that particular team now. Now imagine if we had the same view around energy and passion as a driver of performance in an organization. And we knew that we get our energy from our health, from our well-being, our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health. And so then where I go is I kind of say, okay, so if we can accept that this could be a strategic priority, then yes, we as a company will invest all sorts of resources to try and enhance people's energy, their well-being. But then how do we have those conversations? And for me, I think we should start thinking about when it comes to our development planning conversations that we're having with our line manager, why aren't we having a conversation around the most important driver of my performance, which is my health, as part of my development? So instead of treating you, George, as a unit of production, and all I'm interested in is whether you've got the right skills, knowledge, behaviors, and experience, and of course those are drivers of your performance, why would I not also start having a conversation about your well-being and saying, hey, George, in the next 6 months, these are a couple of areas that we got to work on together to enhance aspects of your well-being. Now what are we going to do? And it begins to create that climate and that culture that Steve talks about. So sometimes you've got to build it into a bit of the infrastructure of the organization, into some of the systems, into some of the processes, because otherwise it's only the emotionally intelligent line manager or somebody like Steve who's had his own lived experience, who's concerned about this and will have those right conversations. And I want to see that kind of conversation happening across all organizations as a driver of individual performance.
I think it's that kind of transparency in the world of work, which would certainly help on Steve's prevention point, and I think if you're physically unwell and or you're not feeling great, you need to have a day at home to get better, and actually acknowledging that mental health is a key part of that would presumably help things for when it goes really wrong, down the line. So trying to identify those movements. So.
Do you think there's a risk of, if mental health becomes part of your performance and development conversations, that people could feel perhaps a loss of separation between work and themselves and their personal life? Or do you think, I can imagine that being some critics' views.
No, absolutely, Ethan. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are a lot of people who kind of say to me, first of all, I don't want to talk about mental health because of the stigma, but what I'm trying to say is that mental health, we shouldn't compartmentalize mental health and physical health and spiritual health and emotional health. Do you know, those are all part of me as a human being. Now, guess what, Deloitte? I bet you've invested lots and lots of money in enhancing people's physical health at work. You've got gyms, you've got gym membership, you've got bike to ride to work schemes. Why would we not be doing the same when it comes to emotional and mental health? But for some reason, we separate it and we kind of say, and also, by the way, people will also challenge me. They'll kind of say to me, they'll say, Geoff, how can you ever have a conversation with Ethan about his weight? How could you ever have that conversation? I mean, that's personal. Don't talk to Ethan about his weight. Yet we're spending lots of money these days teaching line managers how to have conversations about people's emotional and mental health, how to spot the signs, how to show care for your emotional or mental health. Well, why wouldn't I want to also show some care around your physical health? And so I think this notion of kind of work and personal, it's a bit like we say to people, we want you to bring your whole self to work until you do.
Yeah.
Until you do. And how do we shift that? How do we change that?
Definitely.
To kind of say, we realize, I don't like the word work-life balance because it kind of means, I'm going to work hard and I'll stop working and then I'll do no work so that I can balance it out. I think the reality is it's just become integrated into our lives. Work has become integrated. It's part of who we are. It's part of our everyday life. And, and yes, if you tell me to bring my whole self to work, I'm going to bring it. And sometimes,
what's and all kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it is a challenge, isn't it? Because it then brings in this whole point around boundaries and, you can get sucked into work becoming so all encompassing. So I guess you think about bringing your whole self to work. We would often think of bringing out elements of your personal life into your work life, but I guess one of the big challenges is that thing where you're physically present with your family or your kids or whoever's important to you, but you're mentally not, because you're thinking about something else, or you're checking your phone. And I mean, that was one of the practical changes I made a few years ago, was that I had 2 phones, and I made sure that at a certain time, and it varied when it was and had to be flexible, but I would put my work phone on airplane mode, and would try to be more kind of present. So I think it's good for the things to be integrated, but I think at the same time you've got to define some rules that kind of work for you, so that you're not just feeling like you're 24/7 just kind of on that email train.
Yeah. And I think as we start teaching people, what are the things that drive, your well-being? We kind of know the physical stuff, although we don't know about recovery. So we never take time out to just recover. And that's a great point that imagine having a conversation with a line manager now, which says, what, I noticed you don't recover. You are 24/7. I send you an email at a certain, and you respond to me at 2 a.m. Come on, what is going on? You need time to recover. You need time out. And we start having a different conversation, so we know what drives our physical health, but how do we also have those conversations, where people know that they're going to do X, Y, and Z, because that's about, looking after my emotional and mental health. And the example that Steve gave, that might be the way in which he began to separate the two. But it was kind of, it's okay to be doing that. Why? Because it's going to enhance this man's energy, and it's going to help him to perform better at work.
Mm. I think the packaging up mental and physical health as under the sort of health banners, that's a great endpoint. But the reality is we've had probably decades more of discussion and conversation about physical health. 80s workout videos, getting your leg warmers on, all that sort of stuff. Jogging around the California roads, but mental health is sort of catching up a little bit. And I suppose maybe we're in this sort of phase right now where there is a bit of a focus on mental health to try and come match that awareness around physical health, and then ultimately, hopefully, we will have a conversation about health in general. But,
but also to remember, George, that our mental health is driven also by our physical health. And so Steve was talking about sleep earlier. It's a key driver of physical health, but it's also very, very good for our mental and emotional health. So yes, I think there is a point in time now where mental health is very much on the agenda. But I really think we need to, need to just step back and just remember that a lot of my mental health is driven by my emotional health and my physical health and my spiritual health.
I think one of the other factors that's really important for me is and we talked about sort of leadership, but if we look at certainly a business like ours, and it would apply to other businesses as well, but we have the dimension of customers, and obviously we have this, I suppose, tradition that customer is king, and that we do everything that, for the benefit of our clients and working in that way. And so whilst we can, as Deloitte, create hopefully safer workplaces for people mentally, the majority of the time for a lot of our people is spent with other organizations as clients. So one of the things I've been sort of challenged about is, how can we in some of our engagements with clients kind of work on, well, actually what's going to be good for everybody, say on this project or this particular assignment in terms of ways of working. And, I've certainly been exposed to situations where you would see it as more an unequal partnership, something that could get close to bullying, because people will think, well, I'm the client, you will do what I say. So I think thinking about how we, I guess, look more holistically at actually, it's going to be in everyone's interest if this project is a place that people want to work, that we keep an eye on the hours and the ways of working and the way people communicate with each other. And so I think now I'm noticing by trying to have some of these conversations with clients, it's actually great, because they're going, you're right, and all these clients, like when you were at Unilever, Geoff, you had your wellbeing policies, but actually I think two organizations working together need to think about how they can make it healthier. We wouldn't expose our people to a physical hazard in the workplace, and therefore we shouldn't be exposing them to a mentally unhealthy environment either.
So do you think businesses are doing enough at the moment, or is more dialogue needed, more leadership down examples needed in general? I mean, Geoff, you speak to businesses every day. What's your kind of perception about where we are and on the scale of things?
We've got a long, long way to go. We've still got a long way to go. Now, of course, organizations like a Deloitte, like some of the big law firms, like some of the big banks who've got significant resources that they can kind of throw at this sort of stuff, are making some amazing progress in this particular area. The conversations that are happening to even this podcast. I mean, 5 years ago, no ways would we be having this podcast. All right. So hats off. And, people like Steve and others that are out there, huge. But a lot of people are working in small, medium-sized businesses in this country and around the world. And, there's still so much work still to be done, in those organizations. And there's still so much work. You still read of people losing their job through some sort of performance management process because they were too scared to say the reason I'm not performing is because I'm suffering from depression or anxiety. And so the business and the community does a survey once a year or every 2 years. We should get to 0%. There should be not a single person loses their job because they've been struggling with mental ill health. So yeah, lots still to do. But I think there are some leading lights beginning to get out there, which is fantastic because then others want to be like that and they start competing with one another and et cetera, et cetera.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Geoff. I've felt personally really challenged about, we've got these great things in firms like ours. And, I don't think there are any large firms that would be saying, what we really want mentally unhealthy workplaces. So I think everyone's behind it. But I think there's two issues. I think one is how it filters down to the actual leadership on the ground. And I think that it has to come through some things we've been talking about. But the other one, I think, is your point about wider society. So I've been challenged around, 99% of people would not probably have access to this. Either they're working, as you said, in small, medium companies, they're unemployed, or they're not in the workplace. And how can we that have perhaps been given a lot in this space help to do things for the wider community? And I think some of the social enterprises that are doing some amazing things, which some of those we support through our 1 Million Futures initiative, but how we can actually help giving people the job skills, but also helping them with their mental health at the same time. I know some businesses like 3 and HSBC that are looking at how their end customers can be supported is really important.
I think that cultural idea of the importance for organizations to foster that culture where it can be spoken about, and the idea of prevention. How about from an individual level? So what can we as individuals do to kind of help build that culture or help support some of the people that we're working with?
I think, again, to me, it comes back to this giving permission to people to talk about it by senior leaders talking about it. So I think that's why it's great that we're doing things like this. I think the more we can have senior people in our organisations talking about it, and also the thing I've been trying to do is that we're not just talking about it in events that are about mental health, but we're talking about it in, if you like, business as usual type things. So we had last week we had a sort of a team kick-off event talking about all the usual things of plans and numbers and everything else. But I spent just a few minutes talking about mental health and why it was important. And people were quite sort of shocked, but I've had, great feedback of people going, I thought it was brilliant having someone talking about that. So I think just trying to introduce it into the normal conversations we're having gets people talking about it and gives people permission to talk about it. I guess the other thing is just, and I know it's perhaps become a bit of a cliche, but this kind of, are you okay type thing, so just spotting really changes in behavior of the people that we're working with and yeah, just being kind to them and asking them and getting alongside people.
And yeah, asking that question just to give people the opportunity to grab onto the boat and talk about their health in general. Yeah.
Did either of you ever think about mental health before you experienced mental ill health?
I suppose I probably didn't think of it as mental health. I suppose I had times when I felt down, when I felt low, didn't really know why, but I guess I would probably try and pin it on circumstances. And I think in hindsight, it probably wasn't. It was probably something more than that. But it was only when it got beyond what I could cope with, that I guess I then had to do something about it and educated myself about it. So probably not really. What about you, Geoff?
Yeah, never. Never. I don't think I ever thought about mental health or emotional health. Never. And, that's part of the, again, how do I often say, I think it was my mother who taught me dental hygiene. Well, guess what? My teeth haven't fallen out. Nobody ever taught me mental hygiene or emotional hygiene. That's why, again, coming back to your point about are things moving in the right direction? We're beginning to see in schools now some of the stuff around well-being, universities coming to the fore and teaching people, how to maintain good emotional and mental health. And people on the podcast might wonder, what's the difference between emotional and mental? And I mean, emotional health are my feelings. I feel angry, I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel anxious. My mental health is my cognitive ability. So when I was very ill with anxiety-fueled depression, full of anxiety, I couldn't think. My mental ill health was poor. I had very limited cognitive ability. But, I've learnt all this stuff over the last, 8 years. No, I had no idea of what was depression or anxiety until it struck me.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think you speak about that kind of the cognitive, like what's going on in there. And I think that is actually quite often manifested in a physical way, in your brain, and there's all the thoughts around that. So that it makes it even more surprising that there's a separation between mental and physical, when in fact they're so interlinked.
I think as well, it's something that is still very under-researched. If you compare the amount of money that's spent, it's great that it is, but a huge amount of money spent on cancer and other physical illnesses. But my son's a medical student coming towards the end of his studies, and he's just seen so little focus really on mental health, and I think it'd be great to see more and more research in that area, because I think there's so much that we still don't know about the brain. Say a lot of research now is making links between gut health and inflammation, and how that potentially can have an effect on depression. So it'd be great just to, I think, see more research, more education, and I think in 10 years' time, we'll probably know so much more than we do now.
Great. Well, Steve and Geoff, thank you so much for coming today and chatting about this. This has been absolutely fascinating. And there's lots and lots of information on our website for about this to keep the conversation going, really. I think just to round things off, let's try and, in a nutshell, tackle this week's question, which is why do we think about physical and mental health differently? In just a few words, Geoff.
Yeah, I think it's just that, physical health, I can kind of see it. Mental health, I can't see it. I can only feel it. And so, as a result of that, we think of them differently rather than one supporting the other and vice versa.
Yeah, I think lack of awareness, lack of education, and the fact that it is something that very often you can hide. You can choose to hide, and therefore you perhaps don't have to talk about it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming, Geoff and Steve, and thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for downloading this week's episode. You can find all of our episodes on our webpage. Just go to deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcasts, where you'll find lots of links to all sorts of information on this topic and many others. Please do go there, and we'd also love to hear your feedback. If you've got any burning questions yourselves which you'd like the Pod Squad team to tackle, or just any feedback at all, please do contact us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.